Okay. Good afternoon. So we have come here for the third lecture of the session on process safety, and this deals with the topic which is given there, fires and explosion. Now, before you go further, there is I want to know from you, what do you mean by process safety? You know safety, right? When you cross the road, you have to be safe, otherwise you get run over. You know what is safety. But how do I combine process and safety? Mostly none of you will know. You will not have an idea what is process safety. So before I begin, I must first, I think, cover that point, unless you would not like me to. Would you like me to cover first what is process safety? Because without understanding process safety, we go into all the rest of the slide. I don't want it to happen that at the end of the day we feel that it was a waste of time. Right? So let me cover what is process safety. Now what is process first? Let us understand what is process. Anything is a process, right? Anything that you come across is a process. Like I walk from here to here, I am in the process of walking. Or I eat food, I am in the process of eating food, right? Or if I do some in the laboratory, I do some some titration or something. I'm in the process of doing some laboratory analysis. Everything is a process. Is there anything in this world which you think is not a process? Anything? You're shaking your head. That means you have something in mind. Huh? No. Okay. But now, I believe all of you are chemical engineers or would be chemical engineers, right? Now, for all of you, process is not really what we are talking about in the lighter vein, like walking, eating. That is not the process that we talk. Process has got a definite connotation for chemical engineers or people who work in the process industry or chemical industry, where chemical industry is a specific industry which is also a process industry. The other process industries are metallurgical industries. Steel plant is a process industry. Fertilizer plant is a process industry. Petrochemical plant is a process industry. Wherever some process takes place. Now what is a process? Now I will give you a very simple definition. If you disagree with me, tell me. Then we will try to find a better definition. So process is in which I take some raw material, I do something to it, some conversion. It could be a chemical conversion or it could be a physical conversion like distillation, separation, filtration, whatever, and get some final products out. And when that final product out, it is possible some byproducts may also come. Right? That's a process. Now unfortunately in chemical industry, although this process definition which I have given you sounds very, first of all, anybody has a different definition of process? Don't have to agree with whatever I say.
Conversion need not necessarily take place. It could be heating or cooling.
Yeah, that's the reason I said it could be a chemical process conversion or it could be a physical conversion. Physical conversion means heating, you increase temperature. Physical conversion means you separate gas from liquid or separate one liquid from another liquid. These are all physical conversion. Distillation is a physical conversion. Filtration, where I separate solids from liquids, is a physical conversion. Right? Any other thoughts? Okay. So a process, although the definition of a process is very simple, take a raw material, do something to it, get a finished product out. Everywhere the same process goes on, whether it is a chemical plant or a fertilizer plant or a cement plant or whatever. Same thing happens everywhere. But unfortunately, when these processes take place, lots of things can go wrong. Many things can go wrong. Now when things go wrong in a process, what can go wrong? You have by mistake you have produced some cement of inferior quality while you didn't intend to do so, right? So that is something which has gone wrong, because that cement you cannot sell. or you have produced in a petrochemical plant some product like say benzene, which is not of the right purity. So something has gone obviously wrong. It could be somebody has made a mistake in operating the plant, or some control instruments have gone wrong, something could have happened. But when these things happen, such type of going wrong happens, like quality becomes wrong, goes wrong, or I was supposed to produce 1000 tons per day, I produce only 700 tons per day, something has gone wrong, right? These things normally have a financial impact. Am I getting across? Because if it is inferior quality, I cannot sell, I lose money. If it is I have produced less than what I should have produced, I have not sold enough, I have lost money. But there is yet one more thing which can go wrong, which we cannot ignore. You see, in a process industry, what can go wrong, and that is why we are all here to talk about that, is some hazards can happen, some hazardous situations can happen. Those hazardous situations can result in a fire, it can result in an explosion, it can result in some people inhaling some toxic gases, it can result in some people getting caught in the fire, engulfed in the fire, and getting very severely injured. Maybe there could be fatalities, there could be a huge explosion, and as a result of the explosion there could be when you have firecrackers in Diwali, very powerful firecrackers, when they burst, you feel in your house you feel little vibration, right? Have all of you felt that vibration? So if that vibration becomes much larger than what you have felt during Diwali, it can also bring down buildings, right? So these are shock waves, it can give very severe shock waves. So we are concerned when the process we are studying, along with the hazards that the processes can create, and how we can prevent those hazards from happening, or if the hazard has happened already, what we can do to lessen the impact of the hazard, to mitigate the consequences of that hazard, is what we are dealing with process safety. So as a chemical engineer, you learn so many subjects like heat transfer, mass transfer, distillation, designing of heat exchangers. You learn about making programs. You learn about mathematics. All this is fine, but when you are going to operate a plant with all this knowledge that you have got, how you design equipment, all this knowledge you have got, unless the plant is operated in a safe manner, the output that you expect from the plant will not be there. So that is the reason that in earlier days, when I used to study, we never had a subject called process safety in our curriculum. We never understood what is process safety is. Only when we went to the industry, we started getting an idea, but the idea that we got was actually a little bit of a lopsided idea. It is not process safety. We always understood the term safety better than process safety. We never understood what is process safety, but we understood safety in terms of not in terms of crossing road, but in terms of working in a plant. So we understood that when a person is walking in a plant and something comes and falls on his head from top, some from the there are a lot of, you must have all visited plants, chemical plants. So some on the pipe rack on top, some nut or bolt falls on the head of a man, and that fellow is not wearing a helmet. You can imagine what will happen. He will probably get a brain concussion, right? Similarly, if a man in a chemical plant where you have got tall structures, you have got tanks, you have got distillation columns, from a height he falls down because he was doing some work there, he has fallen down and he either breaks his head, he breaks his limbs, or he is gone. We understood this as safety, but is this process safety? That is a personal safety, because although in the plant we are getting raw materials, we are converting it to some, we are doing some conversion process, we are converting to finished products, we are doing all that in the plant. But in the plant, if this kind of accident takes place in which people get injured because of personal safety reasons, that is not process safety. So we should not confuse. During our entire very good part of our working career, we were always under confusion. We didn't know what is process safety. Nobody explained to us. People who would have explained, they also probably didn't know what is process safety. But as we started seeing many more accidents happening everywhere, accidents started getting reported because of this your internet and so many, that media was so powerful. Then we started getting some idea of, started questioning why it is happening. And in our country, that big why started from the Bhopal accident. Okay, that is the time the big why started. Why it is happening? Why did it happen in Bhopal? It started from Bhopal accident, and believe it or not, after Bhopal accident happened, most of the important developments in process safety, in the history of process safety, took place after that. After Bhopal accident, one more accident happened, which is equally dangerous and which is equally, it shook up people, world over. That is the offshore platform accident of Piper Alpha. Have you heard of this, Piper Alpha? Okay. Piper Alpha is the name of an offshore platform in the North Sea. So one day, early in the morning, very early in the morning, North Sea, you have an idea of these offshore platforms. They are deep into the sea, and they are in turbulent sea, and in a platform maybe 50-60 people work, and they have living accommodation, they sleep there, eat there. Some people work, other people sleep. They work in shifts. So a very bad accident happened. As a result of that accident, that entire offshore platform, it blew up, killing so many people instantly. And after the Piper Alpha accident happened, people started realizing, well, offshore platforms are being built by so many big companies in the world. Piper Alpha was owned that time by a company called Occidental Petroleum of United States, which is no more there now. And you know the reason why it is not there. So Occidental was the first fellow who faced this problem, and that offshore area, there are many platforms owned by Shell. You have heard of Shell, you heard of Exxon, you heard of BP, you heard of Chevron. Everybody offshore gas back in 1980s, late 80s, was the big find of Norway and UK, and entire Norway and UK were being fed by energy from offshore gas. So everybody wanted to take that gas out, pipe it to their country and use it for heating homes, then heating and using as a fuel in factories. So everybody was interested, and everybody was in a mad rush that, no, let me put up a platform, let me drill, let me find out, let me get the gas and bring it offshore and start using it. And it was cheap, right? UK, still today, most of the homes in UK, and you know how cold it becomes in UK, most of the homes in UK are fired by boilers which run on offshore gas. Like we in our country now, we have in metro cities, all these taxis and auto rickshaws, they all run on CNG. CNG is nothing like compressed natural gas which comes from offshore. Like what comes from the west coast is from Bombay High, what comes from the east coast is basically from Kaveri Basin. Okay. So, Piper Alpha, once it happened, it has brought a number of governmental regulations which started regulating the offshore industry. They started telling you what safety standards you must have when you build an offshore platform. What level of training must be given to the people when you build offshore platforms. Then who are the contractors, how will they be qualified, how will they be tested, so that they are very, you can say that they have the required competence to fabricate offshore platforms. So all these rules started becoming promulgated by UK. UK actually made a governmental body called HAC UK, HAC Health, Safety and Environmental of the Government of United Kingdom. That's a body which gives out all these regulations and rules which have to be followed. Unless you follow them, you cannot operate an offshore platform. Similarly, this happened in basically started happening in Norway and all the Scandinavian countries and all the other European countries. Many other accidents have taken place which are also equally bad, which also have led to development of rules and regulations, but I have given you the major ones. Like Bhopal accident was the precursor to a specific way of making safety assessment of chemical plants called, I don't know whether you have heard of this term, HAZOP. Have you heard of HAZOP? Hazard and Operability Analysis. That technique was developed after Bhopal accident. The technique was developed by a company in UK called ICI, Imperial Chemical Industries. They developed the technique, but the reason for developing the technique was Bhopal accident. And after this Piper Alpha, they have made very, very stringent rules that if you want to put up an offshore platform, now those rules have got extended to onshore installations also. If you want to put up, then you have to first of all tell the authorities that in your opinion, why you feel that your plant is safe. Why do you feel that your plant is safe? So the fellow who has to say that I feel that my plant is safe has to do a whole lot of work. He has to find out in how many ways it can become unsafe, in how many ways there could be a fire accident, there could be explosion. He'll look at all that, then he'll say, okay, if it happens, there are say 50 such cases. Each of those 50 cases, if it happens, what I should do so that it doesn't happen. So he has to do a lot of work to convince the authorities that, well, this plant we have done thorough analysis and we have come to the conclusion the plant is safe not only for our people, but also the people who live in the surrounding vicinity. I mean, if the plant explodes, people in the vicinity also will get affected. So for their safety, we have made this study. Please look at it and please give us permission to operate the plant. So unless this permission is given to operate the plant, they cannot operate, they start operating the plant. This is the case in Europe. It is not so stringent in our country. So in our country, you hear every now and then explosions, fires happening, and people are getting away with it, which is a very sorry state of affairs. Anyway, that's a different subject, we will not go into that. So this is so much about process safety. So in process safety, what strikes us most when we talk about process safety. What strikes us most? We are not talking about personal safety, we are talking process safety. What strikes us most? In a chemical plant, what is it that happens in the perspective of process safety?
Leakage through pipes, walls. Leakage through pipes or walls.
Leakage through pipes and walls, yes.
Oil and gas industry, explosion and oil industry.
So that's written in front of you. What happens? Fires and explosions. That's what straight away comes to the mind when when you say process safety in a plant, right? My background is I have worked 37 years in a petroleum refinery, and after that I have been doing a lot of consulting work. So our understanding of safety, process safety, is there is a fire or there is an explosion. Thankfully, there have been very few explosions, but more fires. Some people, there have been casualties. In some explosions, there have been casualties. But basically, what do we do when there is a fire or what we did? When there is a fire, 4 or 5 people will go running to the spot. First, we will try to put out the fire, because we have a fire water system, fire water lines. Then we have people, quite hefty people who can hold the fire hose, where the water comes at very high pressure, and put out the fire. Then we have got a fire, we have got people who are trained to do it, and their training is kept up that every morning, suppose there is a crew of 15 firemen in the refinery, every morning they have to undergo a drill, they have to jog and keep themselves fit, and all that has to be done. So that when there is a fire, they are ready to fight the fire. So what do? We go and fight the fire. We put out the fire. Then some fellows say that, why did this fire happen? How did it happen? Then some fellow will come and say this is how it happened, and he will put out a report. And he will be asked, okay, now what should be done so that it doesn't happen again? He will put again something. One man will put something, one of the officers or somebody. It gets recorded nicely in a piece of paper, typed and all that. We didn't have so many computers those days, typewriters, type it. It gets filed and that is the end of it. People forget what happened. Why the fire took place? Because the same fire has happened again after 6 months. So what happens? We don't learn lessons from past accidents. Same thing from explosions. Somebody has gone and done something wrong, some wrong operation, because of which some explosion happens, and some of these explosions are very serious, very severe. Happens. If the luck is bad, some people die. In our country, it's not a big deal, because if somebody gets killed, there will be some inquiry and all that, but ultimately he is paid, his family is paid compensation. And that is also negotiable. It happens and then the matter is over. Then again after 3 years, same thing can happen. This has been happening. It has not happened only in the company where I work for, it was happening everywhere. So now, if that is the way we treat fires and explosion, then we are fooling ourselves, right? So, it is a very good thing that your institute has started this program of trying to understand what is process safety, not in the manner in which it was being understood so far by people, by companies, but in a manner by which you could understand the reasons why fires take place, how fires take place. Is not more of how fire takes place. How fire takes place also we should know, but we should know more about why it takes place. Why should a fire take place at all? Because if fire takes place, then you have the question of putting out the fire, then you have the question of somebody getting injured, somebody getting burned. All those are come afterwards. The basic reason is why fire should take place. So, this course, the intention of this course is to give you the concept or what goes behind fires, why a fire should happen, to ensure that it does not happen. What are the things that you can do in terms of building it in your design, in terms of ensuring that the people who operate the plant have the required amount of expertise, required amount of understanding, required amount of skill, so that they work safely and you don't get fires. And should the fire happen, because everything is not in our hands, should it happen, then what is it that you should do to ensure that the loss is minimized and you mitigate the consequences of such an accident. So, in this talk that I am giving today and tomorrow, I will be covering basically the concepts behind it. I am not going to give you any mathematical models or mathematics or arithmetic, nothing of the sort. I want to give you the fundamentals, the principles behind it, because if you know the principles behind it, if you understand the principles behind it, then how to make those principles happen in terms of engineering it, that is something else which you can always learn. Now, this subject of process safety, fires and explosions is something which you have to see from the perspective of all the subjects that you have studied in, all the major subjects that you have studied in chemical engineering, because everything will be required. Your understanding of heat transfer, mass transfer, your understanding of dispersion, your understanding of electricity, everything will get, if you want to do something about it so that fires don't happen, the entire set of knowledge will have to go in to build it into the design. How it happens, we will see by and by. Now, before we proceed to the next slide, I would like to first explain to you some of the very fundamental definitions. I call them definitions, they are definitions, but through these definitions you get to know some concepts. So, let us first get the basic concepts clear, because it will help you to then go down further and apply these concepts when in specific situations. So, now this slide is something very important which you should understand. It says essential elements of a fire or a combustion are fuel. You need a fuel, then you should have an oxidizer and you should have an ignition source. So, three things are required. Okay. Can I use this as a for drawing something, or are there anything here? Yeah. So, three things are, you need for any fire to happen, you need fuel, you need an oxidizer and you need an ignition source. So, this is called a fire triangle. Okay. So, one arm of the triangle is fuel, one arm is the oxidizer, the other arm is ignition source. Now, all the three arms of the triangle must be present for a fire to happen. If you do not have one of them, you have no fire. Like you have an ignition source, you have an oxidizer. Example, you have an ignition source, you have an open flame, you have atmospheric air, which is an oxygen, which is an oxidizer, and but there is no fuel, then there is no fire. When you strike a match, you get a flame, right? So where is the fuel and where is the oxidizer and where is the ignition source when you strike a match? Wood is the fuel and oxidizer? Air. And spark? When you strike it, it will spark that catches fire. To help it to catch fire, you have that head of the match, which is a combustible material which has to first light, right? So the three elements of fire, of having a fire, is fuel, an oxidizer, and a combustion source or ignition source. So now let's see fuels. What are the fuels you could have on there could be liquid fuel, solid fuel, and gaseous fuel. Okay, you got all three types. Example: what is a liquid fuel? Gasoline is a liquid fuel. Gasoline is petrol, right? Acetone, ladies used to remove nail polish, right? You are familiar with that? That is nothing but acetone. Okay, acetone. Ether is also a very light fraction, a petroleum fraction. Pentane is also it's a pure compound. These are examples. These are all fuels. Then you have solids. What are the solid fuels? Plastics. Plastics will burn. If you try to ignite plastic, they will burn. Wood dust, fibers, metal particles are also solid. If you take aluminium, small particles, and try to light it, it will catch fire. Photographic film will catch fire, yeah. Aluminium thing catches, all these crackers, firecrackers, they put cobalt, they'll put aluminium, cobalt for blue color, aluminium for dazzling white color. So those are all used for as a solid fuel. Gaseous fuel, acetylene, torch cutting you must have seen on the roadside, acetylene gas, torch. Propane is what we use in our kitchen. Carbon monoxide normally you don't come across in our day-to-day life, but in the plants, yes. In day-to-day life, sometimes you come across carbon monoxide when in a closed room, right, or in a car. You're sitting in. This has happened so many times. In a car, the garage is closed. You keep the car running because you want the AC to be on. Then after some time, unless there is air to feed the combustion of petrol, it is the gas which is going into the from the garage, because the door is closed, going into the engine and causing the petrol to burn, and what is coming out is carbon monoxide. So you must have heard of many accidents happening where people are relaxing in the air-conditioned atmosphere in a car which is in the closed garage, and after some time you find that they are all dead. So that is carbon monoxide poisoning. Hydrogen is another fuel. Hydrogen is used, is prevalent in running automobiles. We don't have such things here in our country, but many European, American countries, like we are putting petrol in the car, there are cars running. You can go to a petrol or gas station and fill hydrogen in your car. So hydrogen is another fuel. So these are examples of fuel. Okay. Why are we doing this? We are slowly trying to understand what happens if something happens. What happens? Okay. Oxidizers. Gases, gaseous oxidizers, the most prevalent is air, which contains oxygen, 21% oxygen. Fluorine, fluorine is an oxidizer, chlorine is an oxidizer. In those chemical reactions, oxidizing reactions, you can have many reactions oxidized by fluorine, chlorine. Fluorine and chlorine, they belong to the same family, halogens. Then liquid oxidizers, hydrogen peroxide is a very well known liquid oxidizer. It is used for many chemical reactions for oxidation. Nitric acid is an oxidizer. It is used for in your dye stuff industries, paint industries. Nitric acid is used as an oxidizer. Perchloric acid is also an oxidizer. These are only examples. There are many more. Solids, metal peroxides, ammonium nitrite, these are all oxidizers. That is, you put metal peroxide in a reaction, this will oxidize the reaction. Then we have the last are the ignition sources. What are ignition sources? Obviously sparks. In a chemical plant, you go and in the middle of the plant you take a matchbox and just open a spark and just strike. You will not be sure whether you will also get burnt with it, because there will be a big blast and you will get burnt with it, because that is a spark. If there are some combustible gases around in the right concentration, it will immediately catch fire. So sparks is the most common. The other thing which is also quite common but not well understood is static electricity. You have any idea about static electricity?
When we dub, there are some particular things. So what happens is the charge gets accumulated on the surface. So when those come into contact with each other, there is a transfer of
Spark jump, right?
Especially like when in winters when sweaters, so those have lots of the static.
Or in winter you comb your hair. Huh? You will find that when you take the comb out, you will find some noise, that is a small spark jump. Or in a winter you walk on a carpet, right, with dry shoes. You will feel that as you move there will be small sparks. These are very minute sparks, and you will not be able to see it also, but sparks get generated. But those are harmless, nothing happens. But static electricity can be really harmful in certain situations where it can lead to fires and accidents. For example, right in your east coast, not so much in Chennai, but you move a little up, Visakhapatnam, in that region, the accidents due to static electricity is quite common. And that static electricity, the spark jump is coming from the clouds, lightning strikes. Accidents with lightning strikes is very common. For example, in a refinery or any other plants, there are many instances where you have long vent pipes through which some gases, combustible gases, small quantities are let out in the atmosphere as a normal process. When there is a severe lightning strike, you will find that at the top of that pipe, the gas catches fire. The gas is there, fuel is there, oxygen is there, but spark was not there. With the lightning strike, you also get the spark, so it catches fire. There are many other situations where it happens. The most dangerous thing which happens in a chemical plant is, in a refinery is basically, when you allow liquid to flow through a pipe, okay, allow liquid to flow through a pipe at a high velocity, you have a, for example, you have a tank and you have a pipe through which kerosene is flowing into the tank. If the kerosene is flowing at a very high volumetric flow and the velocity through the pipe is very high, based on the diameter of the pipe, velocity it is very high. As it moves along the wall of the pipe, it generates static electricity. As the liquid comes out, the accumulated static electricity will immediately jump to the nearest conductor. And if that happens, then the atmosphere inside the tank, you have air, you have fuel, you have spark. All the three are present. So what will you have? Inside the tank there will be a fire or an explosion, because it is a confined vessel, no? So there could be an explosion. So there is a cardinal rule that whenever we are trying to take any petroleum liquid inside a tank which is empty to begin with, I must not allow the velocity of the liquid to be more than 1 meter per second. Once the liquid level has built up to some extent, so whatever static electricity is there, it will get dissipated within a liquid level. There is no oxygen there, so there is no problem. So while the tank is empty, you cannot have a very high velocity, and the most dangerous product is the fuel that is used for driving aeroplanes, aviation turbine fuel or kerosene. That is the most dangerous fuel which can lead to this kind of hazards. So there are such things, there are lots of do's and don'ts which come out of it. So that is static electricity. Yeah, you were saying something? Yeah. Heat. How does heat become an ignition source? So far what I told you, it may not be clear, but it will be clear when I go a little further. But let me tell you only so much, that when there is an atmosphere image, there is some flammable gas like propane, butane or whatever flammable gas, and there are hot surfaces nearby. If there are hot surfaces nearby, then there is a possibility that hot surface will become the ignition source for the gas. Am I putting all of you to sleep? No? Sure? Okay. Hot surfaces will become ignition source. Why it happens? We will see. Now, where do you get hot surfaces in the plant?
When you're boiling,
Near the reactors?
when you're boiling liquids
Boiling liquid where?
in reactors.
Liquids don't boil just in the open, in the plant.
Heat exchanger.
Heat exchangers. But heat exchangers, I am exchanging heat. All that is happening inside. Outside, how is it? How?
Surface of a tube. There may be a temperature rise.
Yeah, but the tube is within the heat exchanger, right?
The walls of the shell.
Walls of the shell could be hot. But when I am doing a heat exchanger, in a heat exchange, my designs would not be such that I lose heat from the walls of the shell. Then where are they? How have I captured that heat? I haven't. I have already lost the heat to the atmosphere. Then what heat have I? So I will not do it that way. Very, very common. Where do you get hot surfaces? Reactors, yes, but reactors are all, they are all insulated and all that, all big things, Let's see a simple thing. What is the most common hot surface in a plant? What pipes? What do you mean by transport pipes? Pipes transporting some oil or some liquid or chemical, but why should it be hot?
Products could be hot. Products could be hot after a reaction.
Yeah, products could be hot, but then
Then it is insulated.
they are insulated. You are right. The most common thing is, you see all these small plants where we have so many accidents, they don't have all reactors and all that. They are very simple batch processes. These fellows who make pharmaceuticals, nothing against pharmaceutical industry, but to a chemical engineer it is not a big challenge. To a chemist, yes, but not an engineer, right? Because after all they are like kettles, right? But these accidents happen in that type of plants. So where is the hot surface coming from? It is what you said is right, hot material going through pipes, and the most common hot material that goes through pipes in bulk of the industries is steam. Everybody uses steam because steam is used for heating, right? And everybody has a small boiler, he gets steam, it is used for heating, and the insulated pipes which carry steam, in most cases insulation is damaged, it is stripped off, nobody goes to replace it, so you get nice hot surface at the temperature of 150 degrees, 170 degrees centigrade, right? And if you have a nice good atmosphere of propane and butane mixture in the vicinity, it can easily become a source of ignition. Okay. So far so good? Have I got across? Okay. I am going a little slowly because these are all concepts. We must understand the concepts. Because I know you are in the college, you have not visited industry to the extent it is required to visualize these things. So I am just taking a little more time to explain to you. But I am happy that you are able to absorb and understand. At least all of you are nodding your head. So that is good. Now we will go to some kind of definitions, simple definitions, so that concepts are clear. Let us not confuse things. We will go for definitions. It is always nice to have definitions, Somebody explains some difficult concept with a simple definition, it comes in here, it registers here. So with that object, now combustion and fire, what is combustion and fire, how you define it? It says it is a chemical reaction in which a substance combines with an oxidant and releases energy. We have talked about this so far. Oxygen, that is oxidant or oxidating agent, fuel, and a source of ignition. Three are required for a fire. And when a fire happens, what is that fire? We just try to define that fire. What is the fire? Fire is nothing but a chemical reaction. This chemical reaction takes place in something called a flame. There is a flame in which this combination of oxygen, fuel, and the spark. The spark is initially the spark results in a flame. All that happens in a chemical reaction. But more important thing to understand here is that if you have a chemical reaction like a match, you light the match, within half a minute it will get extinguished, right? Because the wood is getting burnt and it gets extinguished. Suppose there is a lot of wood, but there was a very little combustible material. Then will the match burn? It won't. Why? Because the energy that is released to sustain the reaction, if that energy is not enough, combustion cannot be sustained. For example, if there is a flame, it releases energy, right? Suppose the flame was such that it is very little material was there at the head of the match, and the energy it gave was very little energy after that it got extinguished. Then there is no energy to sustain the fire, so it will automatically extinguish. So you must try to understand the last line. It says as part of the energy released is used to sustain combustion. If that energy released is not enough, it will not sustain the combustion. The combustion will die on its own. The flame will get extinguished. Is it clear? Can you give another example of this? Where the energy is not sufficient to sustain combustion, energy released. The flame?
Ran out of combustible material. You said there is very less combustible material in the fire.
Yeah, so if the combustion material is less, then that little combustion that takes place, it is giving away heat. If the combustion material is more, it will give more heat. Combustible material. If it is less, it will give less heat. If that heat that is so less that is not enough to burn the rest of the wood of the matchstick, that wood will not burn of the matchstick.
Cold in a bike.
Pardon me?
When the spark plug gets colder in a bike,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Doesn't give sufficient spark to ignite the
continue the combustion.
fuel, the petrol.
Yeah, but that is that lack of released energy, or is it because the spark is not strong enough?
Spark is not strong.
So that is not what I am talking about here.
On a cold day, like in the morning, when you start, it combusts, but then it doesn't sustain combustion. Like it gets switched off. It doesn't continue.
No, if that happens, that means you are not giving enough fuel.
Fuel is there in the tank.
No, fuel is there in the tank, but it must get into the cylinder. If it doesn't get into the cylinder, it will not burn. Am I? What we are talking about is that the released energy because of burning, because of combustion, if that released energy is not enough to sustain combustion, then the combustion cannot continue. That's what we are saying. And I am giving example as a matchstick that is the closest to us to understand. Huh?
Electrical spark.
Electrical spark in what manner? Can you explain?
In household, small sparks comes up.
Yeah.
But that is not sufficient to carry out the burn through the wires. It just sparks.
That means what you are saying, the spark does not have energy, enough energy. The spark does not have enough ignition energy. That's why it doesn't burn. But we are talking about a case where the fuel is burning, but is not giving enough heat.
Like in Hindu, we do that Havan thing.
Yeah.
So in that, wood is not sufficiently, it doesn't have sufficient energy to burn by itself. So we add ghee on that. So that can be
That's a good example, because unless you add ghee,
yes, sir.
Hmm?
It won't burn.
Hmm.
It won't burn.
in terms you don't, unless you add fuel to the fire, it won't burn. So little bit, if you just put wood and put little bit of ghee and try to burn it, that ghee will, by catching fire, the ghee will not give up enough heat. Ghee is after all it's a carbohydrate. It has to burn to give an exothermic heat of reaction. If that exothermic heat of reaction is not enough, the wood will not burn. Why the wood will not burn, it will become clear to you a little later. How the combustion takes place. So we have now, I think we have understood this, the last part of the sentence. Part of the energy released is used to sustain reaction. Go to the next one, ignition. Source of ignition with sufficient energy or the gas reaching a temperature high enough to auto-ignite. Let's take the first part first. Source of ignition with sufficient energy. So one of you said that spark plug is not sparking enough. It means the spark plug doesn't have enough energy source, right? Doesn't have enough ignition energy. So if that happens, then it is not a source of ignition, right? Or a gas reaching a temperature high enough to auto ignite. If you have a gas and the gas is at such a temperature at which it will ignite by itself, that is an auto ignition. That is also a source of ignition. If you have a high temperature gas in an environment in which it will ignite by itself, becomes a source of ignition. More about auto ignition later in subsequent slide. Now this slide only. It says auto ignition temperature is what? It's a fixed temperature above which adequate energy is available in the environment to provide an ignition source. It simply means this, that if you bring gas, heat it to a temperature which is high enough, it will catch fire on its own. From where does the energy come for the gas to catch fire? It comes from the environment. That means the environment has got that energy for it to auto ignite. So if you take gas, say propane gas, and you release it in say Alaska, where the temperature outside is minus 40 degrees centigrade, right? The gas has got a fixed auto ignition temperature, but the environment doesn't have so much heat, because it is so cold, it is minus 40 degrees for it to catch fire. But if you take the same gas and bring it to Rajasthan and release the gas, where the temperature outside is maybe 45 degrees centigrade or 50 degrees centigrade, every likelihood the gas will catch fire. So for auto ignition, the auto ignition temperature is a fixed temperature at which it becomes an ignition source by taking heat from the environment. The environment is hot enough to provide that heat for the ignition to happen. If the environment is like Alaska, then ignition won't happen. All right. You go further on. Have you heard, anybody heard of flashpoint? Huh? You have heard of flashpoint? All of you? So what is a flashpoint?
So it's a temperature at which a fuel catches fire. So for instant like 4 seconds, for a very small instant, that is a flashpoint.
So flashpoint is the lowest temperature. So let's give your thinking a definition. It is the lowest temperature at which a liquid gives off enough vapor, enough vapor to form an ignitable mixture, right? Form an ignitable mixture with air. As adequate vapor is produced, as inadequate vapor is produced to maintain combustion, vapor will burn only briefly. That means it is the lowest temperature at which flammable liquid will give just enough vapor in the presence of an ignition, so it will just ignite, and because that little ignition has not produced too much heat of exothermic heat of reaction, that it can generate more vapor and which can again catch fire. Because that has not happened, the flame got extinguished. So that is called flash point. Okay. Now why flash point is important? We should understand. You will not know. Flash point is important because when we store petroleum products in tanks, if the petroleum product has got a very low flash point, for example, suppose it has got a flash point of say 40 degrees centigrade, and your tank is situated in a place like Rajasthan where the ambient temperature is 45 degrees centigrade. So you are storing a product with 40 degrees centigrade flash point, or let's refer to the definition all the time, gives up enough vapor, little bit of flame will briefly burn at 40 degrees centigrade, and when the outside is 45 degrees centigrade, what stops that vapor to become increase in the tank to increase and result in more vapor coming out and catching fire and creating a problem and creating an explosion, right? So we always try to say that petroleum, this is applicable to petroleum products, they must be stored at a temperature which is sufficiently below the flash point. If it is near the flash point, danger of fire. If it is above the flash point, and you store in this type of tank, 100% there will be a chance of fire. Why 100%? Because there is vapor here, flammable vapor, air, and any spark can happen because of static electricity. Right? So the rule is, all these rules are given in a document called Petroleum Rules, which is a Government of India publication, and it is also there in, you heard of a thing called OISD? No, not likely. Okay. OISD means Oil Industries Safety Directorate. It's an arm of the Ministry of Petroleum, and it is, whenever you have some time in your library, you see it has produced a number of standards of handling petroleum products safely. So all these fellows have said that products like petrol, products like diesel, products like kerosene should not be stored in this type of tank, cone roof tank. These are called cone roof tanks, because liquid level is here and there is all vapor and air mixture. Should not be. They have to be stored in some other type of tanks. Just you be familiar with the word, that they are called floating roof tanks. Floating roof tanks are something like this. You have a tank, the liquid is all here, and as the liquid level goes up and down, this roof also moves up and down. Okay, this is called the floating roof, and there are seals here, so that vapors cannot go through the sides. So, these floating roof tanks have eliminated the vapor space. So, these three types of products, petrol, diesel, kerosene, are always stored in floating roof tanks, and including crude oil. The crude oil also contains all this light material. What is stored in these tanks? Heavy products, which are not volatile, like fuel oil. Fuel oil is not volatile, it's thick material, right? It doesn't give out vapor when you store. Okay? So, these rules that I just quoted, petroleum rules, it gives the, if the product is below some I think 45 degrees centigrade flash point, stored in this tank. If it is above this tank, stored in this tank. All these are very clearly mentioned. So, in India also, if you want to go and get approval for putting up such tanks, they will check, have you selected the right type of tank for storing this type of products. And unless they will not put the stamp, and the office or the body which is responsible for doing it is Chief Controller of Explosives. There is a body, very powerful people, Chief Controller of Explosive. They will take a drawing to them, that these are the tanks I am putting. Unless they put the stamp on that, on that drawing, you cannot go ahead and start fabricating. Okay. So, that is the importance of flashpoint. It is not only the definition, but we should know the intent behind it, why it is important. Okay.
Sir, in this type of reactor in the floating roof, right, is the vapor not formed at all, or is a mixture of vapor and air?
Yeah, because this roof is nothing but a plate, you see, 6 millimeter thick plate, or
Yeah, so
it is just floating on it is sitting on the liquid.
yeah, so if the liquid is above the flash point,
Yeah.
the vapor will be formed, but it will not form an ignitable mixture with it.
No. If this is the floating plate which moves up and down with the level of the liquid, then there is no space between the top of the liquid level and the bottom of the plate. There is no space. So, there is no vapor space at all. Vapor space is eliminated. Have I answered your question?
Can't we have a vent with exhaust in that?
Vent with an exhaust?
Vent with exhaust.
Here,
Yeah.
and put an exhaust fan here to take the thing out. Is that what you are saying? Yeah, you can have that, but what are you trying to do by that?
Trying to remove the air and the vapor. mixture.
Yeah, but at any given point of time, vapor is getting generated. You are removing it all right, but it is still there, no? Vapor is still there. But then what will happen is, if you try to take this vapor out at a much higher rate than it is getting generated from here, this space will go under vacuum. And what happens when a enclosed container goes under vacuum? It will implode, it will collapse. Right? So, you cannot put these things under vacuum. Okay? So, that is the importance of flashpoint. So, now whenever you are in a industry where you are in charge of some group who is dealing with storing petroleum products, because all these are petroleum products, like you go to a petrochemical plant, go to a fertilizer plant, every type of plant, these are all petroleum products. Naphtha, and you are in charge of doing something with the design, then you will again remember this class. We talked about flashpoint. Well, flashpoint will come back again and again. Okay? All right. 5 more minutes. Next is fire point. What is fire point? from flash point, in flash point what happens? We just heat it so slowly, provide the heat so slowly that very little vapor comes out, the lowest temperature at which it just catches fire, but the flame cannot be sustained. But suppose we start putting enough heat in that material, on that oil, what will happen? Flame will sustain, no? And the whole thing will catch fire. You have studied it, so it happens in a cup. We do it in a cup, right? Open cup flash point, Penske Martin open cup flash point, Penske Martin close cup flash point, and Cleveland open cup flash point. So if I put more heat, what will happen? The entire thing will catch fire. It will not be a just momentary fire. The temperature at which that happens is called fire point. So definition wise, lowest temperature at which a vapor above liquid will continue to burn once ignited. And obviously it is higher than the flash point. So these two concepts are clear, fire point and flash point. It is more important that the flash point be clear. Fire point is a corollary of flash point. Now we come to the other important item called flammability limits. We have time to do it, no? Huh? 5 more minutes. We cannot finish it in 5 minutes. We cannot finish. So, do we want to stay for some more time? And huh? Oh, another lecture is there. Okay. Okay. Let me tell you very briefly about flammability limit first, and then when we meet again tomorrow, we'll talk about it. This is a very important concept, flammability limit. I'll first read what is written here. Okay. It says, vapor air mixtures will ignite and burn only over a well specified range of compositions. It only means that, suppose I have a mixture of methane and air, methane and air mixture. It is a flammable mixture because there is air, there is fuel, when there is a spark, it will burn. But what it says is that, no, it may not happen always. Why? When will it not happen? For the mixture to be flammable, it is necessary that the methane air mixture must have a minimum methane content and it must also have a maximum methane content. It will be flammable only in this range. If it is lower than the lower methane content, even if we bring a spark, it will not burn. If it is higher than the flammable, higher than the highest methane content, then also it will not burn. That's simply what it means. Now I will give you an example by which this thing I want to drive home this point. You have seen in petrol pumps, right? You have got the dispensing pump. From where the petrol comes? Tanker is outside, but the pump is underground. So underground, there are tanks. Suppose there is a petrol pump, this is the dispenser, then there are tanks here underground in which there is petrol, okay? And there is a pump here, and the pump will take suction from here and will go into your car. And when the level comes down, you have to bring a tanker and fill petrol here, right? Okay. Now in this tank, if I take a source of ignition, like if I make an electric spark over here, will it catch fire? Will the tank catch fire?
Depends on flash point.
It is petrol. It is flash point of petrol is something like maybe minus 10 degrees centigrade or minus 20 degrees centigrade.
Above the upper flash
Hmm?
limit. It's above the UFM, the upper flash limits.
Hmm?
Oxidizer is also
It is oxidized there, no, because this vapor space is nothing but air and petrol vapor mixture. Air is there. But will it catch fire?
So it may be above the upper flammability limit because concentration is very high.
Maybe above the upper flammability limit. Anybody else?
Since the tank is full of petrol, there is more chance of getting into upper flammable limit. Because
Anybody else? Do you agree with what he says?
Storing down take more. Yeah, it has to catch fire.
You are saying it has to catch fire. Huh? Huh?
Like we need more temperature to catch fire as compared to when storing.
No, let's talk about what is there. There is a petrol. I have put a spark plug there, which is sparking. Will it catch fire? Why?
Because
Sir, that triangle is getting completed. Like fuel is there, like petrol is there, like oxygen is also there, and we are giving that spark. That is playing the role of ignition, sir.
So this will according to this will catch fire. That vapor air mixture above the liquid inside the tank will catch fire. Right? That's what you are saying. Except he is saying it won't. Right? Anybody else agrees with him? You agree with him? Huh? Okay. Now, petrol, let's take it as petrol is a complex mixture of right from C4 to C6, C7, right? Let's take it as something like C6 average, assume. Vapor, C6 vapor air mixture is flammable, usually not only C6 but most hydrocarbons, in the region of, let's say, 5% to say 10%. I may not be very accurate on these figures, but example, I am giving illustratively 5% to 10%. So if this petrol vapor and air mixture is such that the petrol component is between 5% and 10%, it is a flammable mixture. If it is below 5% or above 10%, it is not flammable, which means that although oxygen is there, although fuel is there, although spark is there, it will not catch fire. What is happening here? The petrol is exerting a vapor pressure in an enclosed vessel, right? And the vapor pressure is such that the petrol content in this vapor space is much, much higher than 10%. So it is a rich mixture. It's a rich mixture of petrol and air. So when it is a rich mixture of petrol and air, that mixture is not flammable. So it never catches fire. But if you take petrol from a bottle, there is petrol here, and leave it open, in a room. This I wish I had a video to show you. I don't have that video. And leave it open in a room. So the bottle is there and I am lighting a match here. Whole thing will catch fire. It will be a flashback. Because the petrol is very volatile, right? The petrol which evaporates from there and fills up the room. The petrol air mixture in the room is much less than 5%. Okay? When you have more, nothing will happen. If much less than 5%, you will only get some smell. Nothing will happen. But if you take this petrol and pour it on the floor and just take a spark nearby, the whole thing will catch fire. The pool fire. Because that time the percentage of petrol in the air has crossed 5%. Again, the 5%, these are all illustrative numbers, okay? It will immediately catch fire. So things like petrol, hexane, acetone, if you put it on the floor and try to put a match there, you will find immediately it catches fire. So that happens because the concentration of petrol goes in the flammable range. It goes beyond 5%, means goes beyond above the flammable range. If it is outside the flammable range, like you keep it in a bottle and just leave the bottle open, and how much petrol? Nothing will come. But if you pour it on the floor and try to light it, it will catch fire. But in a petrol pump, in a tank like that, it will not catch fire. So this is the most important thing of flammability limit. We will talk more about flammability limit again tomorrow when we meet. Okay? Was it? Could I get across whatever I had to say today? Yes? Okay. Then we have to go a little fast tomorrow because there is a lot to be covered. Okay, right. Thank you very much.